The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has now gone to Damascus, and the expectation is that he will in some way use his influence with Bashar al-Assad to pressure him into starting some kind of reform process that the Syrian opposition will agree to take part in. That's the theory. It has to be remembered that Syria is a very important country for the Russians. They sell them a lot of weapons. The only naval base for the Russian Navy outside Russia is in Syria, in Tartus. So it's not a disinterested relationship. But I think that the thinking is that Lavrov will be trying to tell Assad something like, look, we stood by you, we prevented that UN resolution, and now you've got to show that you're willing to do more to deal with the internal situation politically than you have done so far. What the Russians didn't like when this moved to the UN was the sense that they feel very resentful over, since last year's Libya crisis, that there's a sort of Western and Arab-led plan to impose something on Syria. So the Russians have influence there, and there is this question as to whether they will leverage that to create significant reforms. But even if they do that, it has to be said that the Syrian opposition, the people who want to get rid of the Assad regime, having spent nearly 11 months being killed and imprisoned in large numbers, are not necessarily in a mood to talk to that regime anymore, and certainly not under a deal that's brokered by the Russians, who have stood so steadfastly by Assad. I mean, to make a point today, Russian tanks, Russian T-72 tanks, today, as Lavrov is in Damascus, are being used to shell residential areas of Homs. That's the third largest city in the country. So that's the perception from the point of view who oppose the regime. From what we've been hearing today, the military operations are still going on around Homs. Certain neighbourhoods are being targeted. It seems to be less intense than it has been. Maybe that's in order to avoid having too much killing while Lavrov is in Damascus. It's hard to say, but I think it's clear, and it's clear from the Syrian official media, there is really only an official Syrian media, that the intention is to carry on fighting. In the Syrian narrative of the events that we're talking about, this is all about armed terrorist gangs, right, who are fighting the Syrian state and threatening the stability of the country, and this is all presented as part of a vast foreign conspiracy against Syria. That's the official version, and the official version continues to say that the Syrian security forces will carry on the fight against these enemies. There's a lot of political support, particularly from the Gulf states, the Arab Gulf states, for the Syrian opposition. It is rumoured, and I think it's likely to be true, that the Qataris and the Saudis are, in particular, certainly financing and probably facilitating weapons purchases by the Free Syrian Army, which is the armed wing, if you like, of the broader Syrian opposition movement. It's quite hard to pin down. My own impression from having met the Free Syrian Army in Zabadani, a town outside Damascus, about 3 weeks ago, was that they are a lightly armed, essentially militia force. But I don't believe that any single government has made the decision to go all out to supply weapons and equipment or training to the Syrian Free Army. I think it may come, and I think it's most likely to come from the Gulf states that we've already mentioned, maybe with the Jordanians. I think Western governments will be very, very cautious of doing that because of where Syria is geographically and where it stands politically. It's at the center of a web of very delicate strategic relationships. It's very close to Iran. Iran has very few allies. Syria is its only Arab friend. With the Iranians, it supports Hezbollah, the Lebanese armed organization, which is a significant power both in Lebanon and in the region. Syria, of course, also has well, it doesn't have a border. It is in open conflict with Israel over the Golan Heights that the Israelis captured back in the 1967 war. Syria is part of what some people call the axis of resistance that includes these countries that see themselves as confronting Israel and American power in the Middle East. And for all those reasons, Western governments are reluctant to get involved. The regional implications of the fall of the possible fall of the Assad regime would be very significant. They would be a blow, certainly, to the Iranians. And that's one of the reasons why the Gulf states, the Saudis and the Qataris in particular, appear to have made, at least in private, a strategic decision to do what they can to bring down the regime. That's what makes the situation so complicated, is the mixture, if you like, of an uprising, a domestic uprising against the Syrian government, and those elements, those regional elements that create already, I think, the reality, and it will become more so in the future, of a proxy war between others being fought out on Syrian soil.